Apocalypse Bringer Mynoghra World Conquest starts with a civilization of ruin. Was Season 1 as good as I was hoping it was going to be, or was it maybe not so? Well, in this one we are going to be exploring and reviewing Season 1 of this Isekai 4X anime. And yeah, I ended up having a good amount of thoughts, to say the least. First of all though, what I want to talk about is the concept, because from a conceptual point of view here, I really thought this had a lot of potential. I still do. The concept is unique, it's different, and that was initially what drew me into this anime. To say the least, I am no stranger to Isekai. I have watched more than the majority of people alive, and while it is my favorite genre, no matter how brain-rotted it may be at times, or is oftentimes, to be fair, I still can't stop loving it. And that's why I love when an Isekai anime brings something new to the game. And the concept of having this world that is based on a 4X strategy game rather than an MMO or RPG or other game genres we are way more used to seeing in Isekai had me interested from the get-go. Now, as this concept evolves and we find out that this world that our characters are now in is not just the 4X game that he knew, but basically it's a mix mash of tons of different games like RPGs, MMOs, DICE, D&D-esque games, and maybe many others. Like, that to me was super interesting from a concept point of view. And they do kind of try to explore a few of these elements, at least towards the end of the season when we start for real, when we start to actually see another type of game interacting with the 4X. They didn't really do a ton with the concept in Season 1, which ended up being a reason why a lot of my interest sort of waned by the end of the season. In a way, it almost felt like Season 2 will be the real start of the show in terms of them exploring this really unique mix mash of games and this concept of these different game genres clashing. Sadly though, Season 1 ended up having relatively little of it. By the end of Season 1, I feel like yes, of course, they did slightly explore the RPG angle and some of those mechanics, but it didn't feel like they really delved too much into it, and of course didn't go into any other aspects of games by the end either. When they flesh out this concept way more in hopefully Season 2, yes, then we might actually get to enjoy this concept way more, but for now, yeah, it is far from ideal. There are many interesting notes though that this concept has that did definitely have me interested. It's not just that you have different elements like the 4X and an RPG in Season 1's case that clash. You also have different systems, different types of attacks. Like the RPG, you see that the general characters have 100% chance to hit attacks and guaranteed attacks that you wouldn't see in the 4X game. And they also explain certain mechanics, yeah, like we don't need to have a big army to beat this massive army of RPG characters or RPG units, because they're programmed to only attack in smaller groups. They don't have the massive 4X battle settings that a 4X game would have. And all these sort of different elements I think was really interesting and really unique and something that I thought was fun and new. But since they, again, didn't really explore too much on it, it ended up feeling lacking, to say the least. By the end, anyway. Another interesting, more conceptual idea they also slightly start to try to explore in Season 1, at least the end of Season 1, is something I also really liked and intrigued me. And that's the notion that, these characters, these game characters, these bosses or wherever else that is brought into this world from all sorts of different games are maybe starting to be self-aware. They're being potentially their own people. And I thought it was really interesting, this starting concept they were trying to slightly go into that, yeah, this general, for example, yeah, he had his stone set characteristics and how he talked, what he did in the game, but now that he's in this new world, maybe he wants to be someone different. Maybe he's questioning who he is, what he is. Maybe he doesn't want to follow the same demon lord that he did in the game. Maybe he wants to be his own man. Like, exploring these things could be really, really interesting, but again, they didn't really do much of it at all, except sort of slightly adding it in for flavor closer to the end of the season. If they actually explore and delve way more into this concept in Season 2, if we ever get one, that I think could be super, super interesting and something I would really, really like. But for now, in Season 1, yeah, we didn't really get too much outside of me wishing the concept was more fleshed out. But alas, it happens. Now, as we move on from the concept, which I think is perhaps the strongest part of this Isekai, we move on to the characters. Now, I have mixed feelings about the character building in this isekai. The most fun characters, or specifically the most enjoyable character interaction for me, was between Atou and our MC Takuto. Their back and forth, their sort of cutesy, lovey-dovey closeness and the interactions they have because of that throughout the season, I thought was overall wholesome and fun and nice, and it, to me, never felt like it went too far. It never felt like it was overdone. Maybe it was for some of you if you watched it, but to me, I never felt like these interactions became too much, or that they became annoying or tiring. It felt relatively well spaced out, and they were a welcome, more comedic reprieve, and something that, again, I kind of enjoyed throughout the season. Outside of this specific character relationship, though, between Atou and Takuto, not a lot of the other characters really felt like characters. The only other characters that got any character work, then again, you can say that Atou and Takuto didn't really get a lot of individual work as characters either, but definitely the two characters that were the most fleshed out of the entire cast were the two sisters. Now, their story and their circumstances were definitely dark and fucked up in more ways than one, especially what they're forced to do by the end of season 1, which is just insane mental torture territory of what they have to go through. But those characters are definitely the most developed ones, and the ones that were the most enjoyable to try to explore outside of these interactions between Atou and Takuto. It would have really been nice, though, if they actually tried to develop, even in small ways, the head warrior, the head clerk, the old wizard guy. I don't even remember their names, by the way. That's how memorable they are. But outside of the very, very main cast, and I mean, basically the 4 characters that I already mentioned, none of the other characters get really any character development outside of the very, very basic. If they would have developed a broader range of characters, at least in some ways, I'm not expecting a whole character episode, but at least giving them a bit more time here and there to very slowly but surely develop their characters, their motivations, their wants, their likes throughout season 1, that would have made for a way more balanced and enjoyable set of characters that would have more of a draw for viewers. Sadly, though, they didn't really end up doing that. Even our main character didn't really feel like we got too much knowledge on, which was a disappointment. When talking about characters, though, you can't get away from talking about Atou and Takuto, which again is the pair that I had the most fun watching throughout this season. As I said, the relationship between Atou and Takuto is enjoyable. It's fun, it's wholesome, it's cute, and it generally felt like a nice reprieve having those moments in between some of the definitely dark stuff that happens in season 1. While these interactions between these two is far from rocket science, it has ended up being a continual, recurring back and forth that, at least for me, I found nice. Maybe you have other favorite characters, though, in season 1. Feel free to leave those in the comments down below. Before we move on, though, to the later portion of this video, if you're enjoying and liking this review and want to support me, do please remember to like and subscribe, as it greatly helps out the channel, and I thank you greatly for doing so. Now, moving on to my gripes about season 1. The biggest one, well, maybe not the biggest, but more or less the biggest, is the plot, and by extension, one specific massive contrivance that really caught me off guard and really soured my mood on the later portions of season 1. Again, as I said, the plot and the concept in and of itself is interesting and has potential, but the specific contrivance that happened in episode 11, I think it was, or 12, really had me shaking my head and thinking, how in the world can you get away with this? Like, this doesn't make sense. And of course, specifically what I'm talking about, kind of a spoiler alert by the way, is when the Flame General comes to invade the nation itself after Atou has defeated the other RPG Ice General out by this human or mixed city. By this point, Takuto, the MC, knows that this world has other game mechanics included. He knows that this RPG game is now in this world. And even though, after the fact, we get to realize that Atou didn't specifically report back that the Ice General had this unavoidable RPG attack, still, Takuto had more than enough information to realize what game these characters or enemies were coming from, and he specifically knew as well this famous after-death scene for the Flame General, he clearly knew was a thing, as he commented on after the fact. Still, he did not plan at all to avoid that after finding out that the Flame General was the one invading, if he even was informed of that. But even if he wasn't, he should have made plans to account for that, as he knew that this might be a possibility before anything went wrong. But he didn't, and in the end we have this after-death scene where the sisters are teleported, and to save them, Isla, this new hero, has to sacrifice herself, right? In this unavoidable sort of sacrifice attack. And the only reason this happened was because the plot demanded that the sisters have this, once again, really, really terrible, dark thing happen so they could go ballistic and become heroes themselves. But I absolutely hate it, and I mean hate it, when a story isn't able to make something happen organically, so they have to force a massive contrivance and have characters act completely different to what they should be doing and thinking and planning to have something happen that they want to have happen, which is the case here. And that definitely soured my opinion on the season by the end of it, to say the least. The only thing I can hope is that if any future seasons do come, that they definitely don't make these sort of big contrived mistakes in the future. But we'll have to see, won't we? Potentially my biggest gripe, though, outside of this specific contrivance, is the lack of animation for this entire season. Yes, I empathize, I understand that some anime just don't get a big budget, and you have to do with what you have. I get that, I understand that, I'm sympathetic towards that. But at the same time, in the end, when you don't have a big enough budget to animate basically any fight in the entire season, and the fight animation you do get, and the general animation you do get is very muted and one-dimensional, for lack of a better word, that does bring the enjoyment down, inevitably so. Even though you shouldn't say that you have to have good animation to make an enjoyable show, it's unavoidable that having better or more detailed animation, especially in fight scenes, especially in an Isekai as well, does up the enjoyment at least to a certain extent. And because the budget clearly was so limited in this Isekai for this first season, my enjoyment was visibly affected, pardon the pun, due to the lack of especially fight animation. Didn't really get to see any cool abilities or any big attacks. Everything just was very basic. And when it is so obvious that you think about it while you're watching, that in and of itself also, in addition, at least to me, further degrades the enjoyment and viewing experience. Hopefully though, animation, budget in general, won't be as big a problem if a season 2 ever does come. That though brings me to my overall general thoughts, and rating for that matter, for season 1 of Apocalypse Bringer Mynoghra. Now, as I mentioned at the start, because of the concept being so new and different and unique, at least to me, that gives some points, so to speak, and enjoyment for me, even though season 1 didn't make the most of it. The characters were average at best, and you didn't really get a lot of character development or character building in season 1. The specific storyline with the sisters, as mentioned, yeah, it was dark, it was gritty, and it was different than what you're used to, but still, characters as a whole was far from this show's strong suit. I do, as I said, especially like the relationship between Atou and Takuto. I think it's a nice, wholesome thing, and it did become an enjoyable part of the show for me, but that in and of itself isn't enough to make a show good. Another pet peeve I had for this season was that it never really felt like Takuto, or MC, took the reins and sort of was the commander that he should be, as he is this really experienced 4X gamer, assumingly, given all we know about him. We do sort of potentially see him taking on that role and being in charge, like I was sort of hoping to see the entire season after this sort of big negative event happens by the end of the season. But I feel like we could have seen that, and we arguably should have seen that way before. While, again, I enjoy the concept of this show, and I think it has a lot of potential in its concept and exploring elements of that concept moving forward, the story was okay-ish, basic in many points. Characters, again, average at best. Animation, definitely not on the high end, to say the least, in this one. A season 2, yes, might make the show really shine if it ever gets one, and that might be where the show really starts to come into its own. But because of a relative decent amount of flaws in season 1, I can't say that this is going to be anywhere high on my list for the year, or potentially even the season. Yes, it's a decent show, and I think as an Isekai it has unique elements, but because of the flaws it has, and because of the things I would say it lacks. It's not going to be more than a average to maybe very slightly above average show with what we currently have. If you're an avid Isekai addict or avid Isekai watcher like I am, yeah, I think you should maybe try out the show. Maybe give it like 2-3 episodes, see what you think. But if you're not hooked by that point, I would just say wait. Maybe wait for season 2 and then continue watching at that point. What did you think of this season 1 of Mynoghra though? Did you like it, hate it? What are your general thoughts on it if you did watch it? Or otherwise, are you going to start watching it now after watching this video or not? Leave any thoughts, comments, questions in the comment section down below. With all that being said, hope you have a good day. Keep watching anime. Hope you had a good time watching this review. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.